Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Janie Ridd? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Janie Lynn Ridd was born in June 1969 and lived in Utah. In 1995, when she was 26 years old, she met a woman named Rachel Booth. Having recently gone through a divorce, Rachel was living in her parents' home. Janie lived by herself and did not feel safe, so the women decided to move in together. They lived in a house at 641 Downington Avenue South in Salt Lake City, Utah. Rachel worked as a paramedic, but in 2010, she developed a herniated disc in her back. Around the same time, she learned that she was pregnant. Later that same year, she had a son named Ryder who had autism spectrum disorder. During childbirth, Rachel re-injured her back. According to Rachel, Ryder's father was not in the picture, so she was on her own. In 2015, Rachel had to undergo surgery to avoid being permanently disabled. As she was recovering, Janie took care of her and Ryder. Janie had control over Rachel's finances and personal documents. Eventually, Janie took advantage of a program that allowed her to get paid for caring for Ryder. She became an important figure in Ryder's life and sometimes allowed people to believe that she was Ryder's mother. Over the next few years, Rachel had several more surgeries. Janie continued to care for her during the periods of recovery. This included monitoring and dispensing Rachel's medication. On June 20, 2018, Rachel received a letter indicating that Janie was suing her for custody of Ryder. Upon further investigation, Rachel learned that Janie had also filed a protective order. Rachel was forced to move out of Janie's house and ended up in a hotel. Janie had custody of Ryder temporarily, but Rachel regained custody 10 days later. Rachel and her son moved into a family shelter, but the experience there was not altogether positive. Later, Janie contacted Rachel and apologized for that whole protective order and suing for custody situation. She asked Rachel to return to her house, which she did. This was an easily avoidable and catastrophic mistake. In April 2019, Rachel had surgery on her back, which of course involved a surgical wound. Janie would care for the wound, but Rachel was experiencing a lot of pain from it. She asked Janie what the wound looked like. Janie responded that it was normal. The pain continued, and Rachel sought medical treatment. She was told that the surgical wound had become infected with MRSA. This stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. MRSA is a dangerous bacteria, often seen in hospital settings. On June 9, 2019, Rachel had another unusual medical episode. She woke up in the hospital with dangerously low blood sugar. Physicians could not figure out what happened. Rachel did not have diabetes. There was no obvious explanation for her symptoms. She was released, but 2 days later, she was back in the hospital with the same thing. In September of that year, she made a third trip to the hospital for the same reason. It was almost like insulin had been introduced into her system. In October 2019, Rachel and Janie had an argument about Rachel's will. Right after this, Rachel had another surgery. She developed 3 massive infections in the surgical wound. One contained E. coli. Under the caregiver arrangement between the women, if something happened to Rachel, Janie would get custody of Ryder. Rachel wanted to change that provision and talked about moving out. Janie asked Rachel to stay until Christmas. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. Starting in October 2019, Janie logged onto the dark web and contacted an entity who she believed was a vendor selling biological agents. In reality, the vendor was an undercover FBI agent. Janie told the vendor that she was a biology teacher at a college preparatory school in Utah. In reality, she worked at a training center. She was not a teacher, a scientist, or anything like that. Janie's objective was to acquire vancomycin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. This is also known as VRSA. It is similar to MRSA, but it is considered a more dangerous bacteria because it limits treatment options even further than MRSA. Janie indicated that she needed the bacteria for a science experiment on antibiotic resistance. The vendor advised Janie that if she was conducting scientific research, she could obtain VRSA through legitimate sources, which seems like a strange thing for a shady bacteria supplier to say. Janie should have immediately realized she was talking to an undercover law enforcement officer at this point, but she didn't. Despite receiving this warning, Janie pressed forward with the purchase and even offered to pay for overnight shipping to obtain the VRSA faster. She just couldn't wait to get her hands on the deadly bacteria. After Janie paid for her order with $300 worth of Bitcoin, the FBI sent a package of fake VRSA to a UPS store in Holiday, Utah, as directed by Janie. Holiday is just southeast of Salt Lake City. The package contained a plastic container full of coffee grounds. Petri dishes full of fake bacteria were placed in the coffee. This package arrived on December 17, 2019. The next day, December 18, Janie picked up the package, drove to a parking lot, then drove to work. Agents approached Janie and asked her questions about the package. She told them the package only contained coffee, but soon admitted that was a lie. Her next story was that the package contained what she referred to as a biological. She ordered it to make beer in her basement. I guess this beer was supposed to have a homicidal kick to it. She could have marketed the beer with the slogan, "It's the last beer you'll ever have." When pressed by the agents, Janie once again changed her story, now saying that the package contained staph bacteria, which she wanted for, quote, experimental purposes and to satisfy a personal curiosity she had stemming from her roommate's recent exposure, unquote. Janie was arrested and charged with 3 felonies. When she was searched, 3 pills were found in her pocket, which Janie said belonged to Rachel. In June 2020, Janie pleaded guilty to attempted possession or use of a weapon of mass destruction and attempted aggravated abuse of a vulnerable adult. As part of her plea agreement, a 3rd charge of aggravated abuse of a disabled or elderly person was dismissed. On August 25, 2020, Janie was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison for the first charge and up to 5 years in prison for the second charge. The sentences were to be served consecutively, so Janie was facing 1 to 20 years in prison. In January 2022, Janie was released from prison. She had been incarcerated since she was arrested in December of 2019, so she only served a total of 25 months. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. The authorities believe that Janie made at least 5 attempts to harm or kill Rachel. It's possible that she injected Rachel with various harmful substances including ketamine, Xanax, E. coli, and insulin. Janie purchased insulin from a vendor on the dark web, and several hypodermic needles were found in her house. None of those needles belonged to Rachel. The authorities also found an expended insulin injector pen that had Rachel's DNA on the inside. According to Rachel, in March of 2019, she and Janie watched a true crime television show involving a perpetrator using insulin. They had a discussion involving how insulin was an effective way to commit murder. Maybe this is where Janie found the idea. Item number 2. Was Janie trying to kill Rachel or trying to make her very sick without causing death? In court documents, Janie's defense attorney wrote that Rachel had become more verbally harmful to a point where Janie's mental health deteriorated and she feared for Ryder's well-being. So Janie was accusing Rachel of mistreating her. The attorney claimed that Janie was only trying to debilitate Rachel to gain legal guardianship and provide proper care for Ryder. Referring to Janie, the attorney continued by saying, quote, "The saddest irony is that she ultimately did what she did out of a twisted sense of desperate caring for the well-being of the child she had grown to love and protect. She snapped. She lost control of her thoughts. She essentially went mad," unquote. Despite offering this explanation, the attorney acknowledged that Janie's actions were atrocious, serious, and represented harmful criminal activity. Janie's defense may seem ridiculous at first glance, but she had many opportunities to kill Rachel. Janie could have used more direct methods to commit homicide if that was her objective. One could argue that Janie was trying to make Rachel sick, but did not necessarily want her to die. If the government could have proven attempted murder, they would have charged Janie with that offense as well. Maybe Janie was simply trying to remove Rachel as a viable caregiver in order to get custody of Ryder. As far as making the argument that this was an attempted murder, Janie did have a financial motive in the form of a $500,000 life insurance policy. Maybe Janie wanted Rachel dead, but was not an effective killer. Considering how Janie tried to purchase deadly bacteria, I believe she was trying to kill Rachel. Maybe she would have been satisfied with incapacitating her, but either way, she was using lethal force. Janie was looking for the VRSA to cause an infection, but she ended up short-staffed in her desire to achieve staff turnover. Item number 3, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Janie was self-centered, calculating, controlling, manipulative, deceptive, sadistic, vindictive, immature, envious, cold, callous, and had a sense of entitlement. Initially, she valued her friendship with Rachel and wanted to be like her. Rachel was outgoing and energetic, whereas Janie was described as socially awkward. Over time, Janie became possessive of Rachel and tried to prevent her from dating men. She was worried about losing the relationship. When Rachel developed medical problems and became vulnerable, this gave Janie a way of gaining control. She became a caregiver to both Rachel and Rachel's son Ryder. At some point, Janie came to think of herself as Ryder's mother, which made Rachel's existence inconvenient. Instead of trying to become like Rachel, Janie was now interested in replacing her. She tried the non-lethal method of gaining custody of Ryder by using the courts, but Rachel prevailed. After convincing Rachel to move back into the house, Janie tried a more direct method by injecting Rachel with insulin and other substances. These tactics were selected to avoid consequences. Janie did not want to go to prison. She wanted Rachel's death to look like a medical complication. The fact that Rachel was suffering horribly during these attacks did not discourage Janie. It may have even been viewed as a benefit. Janie had convinced herself that Rachel deserved to suffer. For some reason, Janie thought that obtaining VRSA would be a good idea, which led to her arrest. From jail, Janie said, quote, "I know what's going to happen. I'm going to end up out of here. I'm going to find a way to get him away from her. He needs to come back to me now," unquote. Despite Janie's apparent fixation on getting custody of Ryder, she was only incarcerated for 25 months. Given the sadistic nature of Janie's crime, she should have served the entire 20 years. For the most part, Janie was able to escape justice. Now moving to my final thoughts. This case is about how trust can lead people to ignore clear warning signs. After arresting Janie, FBI agents showed up at Janie's house and spoke to Rachel. Initially, she insisted that there must have been a mistake, and only later accepted that Janie was guilty. Janie was only able to repeatedly harm Rachel because she took advantage of Rachel's vulnerability. Not just the physical vulnerability, but the feelings of dependency and helplessness. Where most people would have seen an opportunity for compassion, Janie saw an opportunity for elimination. Those are my thoughts on the case of Janie Ridd. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They consistently generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.